Well, welcome. I'm Alex Forrest. I'm one of the curators here at the Grand Rapids Public Museum. This is Jared Yax. He's one of our collection technicians, and we're going to be taking you on a tour today through this facility, which is called the Community Archives and Research Center. We do these tours fairly frequently. We just had one for another CC class on Monday.
Monday night.
Monday evening, we did one for the local history class. So we do these tours for groups pretty frequently, and there seems to be a demand for them because it's kind of interesting material. When you walk through this building, what you see is the museum's archives. It's our warehouse or behind the scenes. You know, if you go to the museum down on the river, you see all the displays and the exhibits, and there's 3 floors, and there's a lot of things there. What we keep here is the rest of the collection. So at any given time, only about 5% of what the museum owns in our collection is on exhibit down on the riverfront there. The other 95% is in storage here. And so people like to see that stuff. It's sort of a behind the scenes look. And the tour usually takes about an hour, and what we'll try, we have sort of a general tour that we give, a path that we take, but we'll try and tailor it at least a little bit to the specific interests of the group. So the one we did on Monday, we talked more about local history. And for today, we'll try and talk a little bit about records management. You know, it's what we do. The museum has what you would think of as a traditional records management program. You know, we have all of the legal and financial documents that any large organization has that have to be managed. More of what you're going to see today is sort of a tangent from that, and it's how, as a department, that we call ourselves the collections department, how we manage the assets of the museum that we're tasked with taking care of, which are physical objects. So it's not so much drawers and drawers of papers that we take care of. It's old pieces of furniture, it's fossils, it's antique weapons, it's all kinds of things. But in order to properly manage that collection, we have several different record-keeping systems that we use. And so we'll try and talk about those, and hopefully, you know, it'll be instructive to you in terms of the things that you're also learning about in class, and hopefully it'll be useful, and hopefully it'll be interesting. So that's what we're going to set out to do today, and we'll just give, I guess, a brief introduction. Like I said, I'm Alex. I've been with the museum for about 5 years now. My role as a curator here means that I am responsible for a couple of different things. If you sort of put them into big spheres, one you could say is access to the collections. So that's, you guys fall squarely into that. Individuals or groups want to see the things that we have for some reason or another, whether it's a general class field trip like you guys, whether it's a very specific researcher who is writing a book on whatever very specific topic, you know, that someone's working on, a dissertation or an article or a book, and sort of everything in between. You know, we've had still artists doing still lifes. We've had the canoe making class come in and look at canoes. You know, we have archaeologists. We have family historians and genealogists, and just about everybody in between. We have a massive collection, and there's lots of different people who want access to it for one reason or another. So that's a big part of what I do. The other part is, you might call it developing the collection, and that mostly means working directly with donors. This museum does not have, and really has never had, a lot of money to, you know, I don't get to go to estate sales and auctions and buy lots of stuff. We rely almost exclusively on donations to build our collection. And so the museum's been around since the 1850s, so 150 some years, 60 some years, and has been collecting all that time through donations for the most part, have built up a collection of about 250,000 artifacts and specimens. Makes us the second largest museum in Michigan, behind only the Henry Ford Museum. And a big part of my job is just trying to be the person who has a handle on what that collection is, areas where we want to grow it or improve it, areas where we want to improve it through adding new items, or areas where we want to improve it maybe by doing more research on the items that we already have. So that's kind of me and what I do, and I'll let Jared speak for himself here.
My name is Jared Yax. I graduated from Grand Valley. I studied history, archaeology, and German language. As a collections technician here, my job is basically to to take care of the artifacts. When we get new artifacts in, give them a number, and then we have to find a home for them. The building that you're standing in is a really specialized building. Temperature and humidity control, and then we also try and limit the amount of light that shines on the artifacts, because those three factors, heat, humidity, and light, are all cause for artifact degradation, or cause artifacts to break down. So when we're trying to preserve these things, we want to make sure that they're preserved in the correct climate, and then to have a safe homes. That way, they can be viewed by future generations. So that's basically what I do. I also do some teaching then, like for the summer camps and whatnot at the main museum campus then too.
Jared dresses up as a knight. He has a full suit of armor that he wears and battles for the enjoyment of the guests.
At the Life as a Knight camp, and then we do that for the Night at Your Museum event then too.
So in terms of records management, the thing I would say that maybe makes a museum stand out or quite different than maybe some of the things that you've studied. And I guess I haven't been sitting in your class with you, but what you could think of is pretty much everything that we take care of is on a permanent retention. And that's where Jared comes in. If you're looking at a typical business and maybe employee records that have to be retained for a certain amount of time, maybe after the employee leaves the business, or tax records they have to keep for 7 years or whatever it is. With those types of things, sure, you have to be responsible for providing a secure place where you can access them for whatever that length of time is. But when the goal is to keep something permanently or for as long as possible, it sort of brings in a whole new discipline of people like Jared, whose job is really to keep these things from crumbling to dust, which everything will eventually, but trying to stave off those factors for as long as possible. So that's kind of a big difference in terms of, as a museum, how we approach our collections.
And it really is kind of a balance between preserving it for as long as possible, but still making it available to people, so that way they can do research on it. If you just stick something in a shelf and just leave it there, nobody can ever learn from it. So we do want to make sure that people have access to it so they can study it, do research on it, and learn from it.
Yep, absolutely. And the most typical way that we do access, and we try and do it in a controlled way, is through our exhibitions and programs. And that's where a curator like myself will select certain objects that we use to tell a story and put them on exhibit. We also do it through things like this, where you sort of get a more unfiltered view of what we have. We are going to mostly be walking around through storage, so I want to kind of get us going. One thing that's pretty boring to look at, but I want to show your group, and we don't typically show this on a tour, is our actual record-keeping systems. And they're just in this little tiny room here, so we may sort of have to take turns and sort of file by and poke your heads in. But the things to be aware of are, since the museum has been around for so long, since the 1850s, we don't have any one consistent set of records. We have different records that have been in use at different times, and reconciling all those is one of the great frustrations that we experience all the time, because if you want to know something about the very early history of the museum, from the 1850s or 60s, it might be in one place. For example, if you're just talking about the records that we keep to document what we have in the collections, the earliest records were done in handwritten ledger books. Someone would bring something into the museum and somebody had a big old ledger book. Maybe that's a better idea, if Jared can just grab some things and bring them out here. Somebody would, in longhand, write it in this ledger book. They would assign it a number, and that's where it was kept track of. So we've got, some of them have been retyped, but you can see some of them are in the original longhand writing. And so that's how some of the oldest records of the museum are kept. Yeah. Jared, make sure can you let the cameraman get a shot too?
Yep.
Then there's a period of time where the way that the records about the objects in the collection were kept in a card filing system. So we've got, can you grab one of the donor card drawers, Jared?
Yep.
Thanks. So we've got, index cards in card catalogs, basically like a library would. But these are consecutive in time with the ledger books. So if you want something from a certain period of time, well, then you look here. More recently, we have what we call our accession files. So we have in this little room off to the side here, 20 or so file cabinets that are all full of manila folders, one folder per object, and that's where we keep important legal documentation relating to a donation. So if you were to donate something to the museum, if you were to donate a chair, let's say, to the museum, we keep all the paperwork related to that donation in a file. And it's important legal paperwork. The most important one is something called a deed of gift that a donor signs saying that they're giving ownership, legal title from them to the museum. It's what we have to have to prove that we own the things that we say that we own. And now, most recently, and for the past 20 years or so, we've done most of this stuff on the computer. So we have a computer database that we use to keep track of the things in the collection. The assumption that a lot of people, and myself included, make when you first encounter this stuff is that everything's in the computer. The cruel, cruel reality is that most of it's not in the computer. At one time, there was a data entry project, and I think, I may be getting this wrong, but I think it was literally like prisoners that they had do this work, where there's 100,000 index cards that needed to get typed into the database to start it out. And so things get missed. There are things that weren't in the cards in the first place because they never got transferred from the ledgers. And so what you have is 3 or 4 different systems that, in order to completely research a particular object in the collection, you really need to check all of them. So our goal is to manage all this stuff in the computer. And when we can, when we have time, we do the work to transfer the information and to bring it up to date so it's all in one central location. But that's something that'll be ongoing way past when I'm gone. What's that?
And that's what you need volunteers for.
Oh, exactly. We work regularly with interns and volunteers to help us with what we call these documentation projects. So big donations, and because we're always taking in new things, and then also whenever we have a spare moment, trying to go back and updating the old things is a big part of what we do. And in our department, there's 4 of us: Jared, myself, 2 other staff, but we have college interns, I think about 9 or 10 this semester. We also work with volunteers, so if anyone's interested, let me know. So I think that's about all I've got standing here. I'd like to get going and walk around so we can see some more stuff. Do you guys have any questions before we do that?
You say you got such a location in your computer and everything.
Mm-hmm.
You also keep that to keep from stuff getting lost or stolen?
The idea...
Keep that track like that too?
The idea is that the computer is the way that we can do an inventory. So a reconciled inventory, the same as you would have at Meijer or Target. Your computer says that you have this many cases of shampoo on the shelves. You can go and count them or go back in the warehouse and count what's back there, and it should all match up. The reality is when you have a 160-year-old museum collection with 250,000 unique things, we have not been able to have a full reconciled inventory. We instead do what's called spot or rolling inventories. And it's just because of resources. We do the best we can where we'll take a specific collection, maybe we'll do the furniture collection, let's say, or the Native American collection, and we'll do a reconciled inventory of a specific group of things, make sure we have everything that we're supposed to have, make sure that it's all sitting where it's supposed to be sitting. So we try and do those on a rolling basis, so we're always inventorying something. I've heard it compared to, it's the same as the people who paint the Mackinac Bridge. You paint the whole bridge, and by the time you're done, you got to start again at the beginning. So we're always inventorying the collection.
So your valuable stuff, though. I know you got some valuable stuff. So y'all really keep that in secure.
We do, actually. We have security is another important feature of this building. Jared mentioned the climate controls. Another thing is security. So we all have these badges that have different levels of security that let us into different spaces. And the most secure room, which is when we don't go in on the tours, we call it our vault, that only just a couple people at the leadership level of the museum have access to. that vault where some, and actually it's not just, and this is kind of interesting, I think, it's not just particularly valuable materials that are kept in the vault. There's some pretty dangerous things that are in there. You know, I think we've worked through ATF and the police department to get all of our weapons and like hand grenades and things like that disarmed.
Hopefully nothing explodes.
Yeah, hopefully, you know, live, you know, shells and things like that. But poisons, we have these things. Do you know what those peas are called? Those African peas, you know what I'm talking about, in the vault?
I'm not sure. what
Okay,
that is.
so I don't know the exact story. I'm probably getting this wrong, but there's a type of a little fruit, I guess they call them peas, that are used in some, I think it's African like jewelry, and they're extremely poisonous. Like even like absorbing, you know, a little millimeter of it through your skin can kill you. So, you know, these are kept in the vaults. You know, yeah, yeah. It's like, I don't know. It's like the frogs, you know, the poison arrow frogs. We've got weapons from South America that supposedly have poison on the tips. So things of that nature are also kept in the vault for their safety and ours.
You know, when we're walking around in the collection then too, just please be very careful not to touch anything. There's two reasons. We always have gloves on when we're touching stuff to protect the artifact from the oils in your skin. That can also lead to breaking down the artifacts. But also with all the, you know, hundreds of thousands of items that we have and how old some of them that they are, there's no way we can tell where all this stuff has been. We don't know who's had it, what might be on it, so also to protect yourself then too. Some of this stuff
we
is
have
dangerous.
pharmaceuticals, you know, taxidermied specimens that, you know, if something was taxidermied in the early 20th century, it was done with arsenic and different processes. So
there's some kava root that's laying out upstairs that it's a local anesthetic, but you know, if you ingest some of that or you touch it the wrong way or touch it to your mouth, you know, it'll start to numb everything, and that's not a good thing. So.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, so like, then how do you maintain them for their protection? Like if something's silver, how do you keep it silver? Do you have staff that has to keep all of these artifacts in that way besides the temperature control?
Yeah, but as we're moving stuff around within the collection, we're also, you know, watching out for problems like for infestations, whether it's insect or mold, or if there's a problem with an artifact. We've got all kinds of reports that we'll fill out about the status of an artifact, condition reports, so that we can kind of track the history of the artifact. Depending on the material, you know, silver oxidizes, it tarnishes. So, like for the example, the Voigt silver, that's something that we'll polish or we'll you know, keep records on. So,
we our museum doesn't have extensive conservation staff or departments. Like the Henry Ford Museum is one that will even outsource this. You know, if you have a damaged painting or a damaged piece of furniture, you know, you can hire them, pay them a couple $100 to fix it for you. We don't have it to that level. Most of the time when we take in new donations, you know, there'll be some light cleaning and some things like that to make sure that something is safe and stable. When we do major work on something, it's usually if it's going to be going on exhibit or being used in a program or going out on loan. So, you know, if we were going to do a new furniture exhibit or something like that, that's when we might either rely on Jared's expertise or maybe even use some outside consultants to, you know, to look at the pieces of furniture, say, that are going in an exhibit and do any repairs that are necessary. As things sit in storage, the goal is more towards stasis, to keeping it from getting any worse, you know, simply because there's so much and we don't have the manpower to do all the detailed work that would be needed on each individual piece. Yes, sir.
So, with having like the 4 different stages of your filing and archives and stuff, have you ever had it where you're going through your archives where you almost rediscover something?
Yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of things that have this like classic understatement to them. Like we have in the ledger book, you know, there's an entry that says something like Maul, M-A-U-L, like a big hammer, Maul, definitely known to have been used by Abraham Lincoln. And it's like one line in the thing. So, you know, you find that and it's like, well, who definitely knew that? Who said it? You know, But we discovered that and thought it was an interesting story in and of itself and chose to take that mall and put it out in a Civil War exhibit that we opened just last year or a year and a half ago at the museum, sort of with the idea that according to the museum's records, you know, this was, we discovered that this mall was used by Abraham Lincoln. It's always interesting when we have so many cool things, and what a lot of people don't realize is not all of them are out on exhibit and being recognized with a sign or a label. So yes, from time to time, we do stumble across something that you're like, wow, we should really do something with that, let people know that it's here. Because if it's something that came in a long time ago, somebody wrote down what it was, put it on a shelf, and then it almost just got forgotten about in a way. But if Jared and the people in his job are doing everything right, even 100 years later, it'll still be there, it'll still be in good condition, and then we can bring it out and tell that story.
Within the collection, we've got over 250,000 artifacts, so there's probably no way that I'll touch every single one of them in my tenure here. So we're always learning new stuff or finding stuff that we didn't personally know about within the collection. So I figured, hey, that might be a good idea to put on display.
I have a question. How do you then authenticate what is given to you? Do you have someone who can say this is from Bronze Age?
Right.
Whatever. Do you have someone who does that, who can do that?
You're looking at them for the most part. It's, you know, we rely heavily on the donor of the item to tell us what they know about something. Now that said, you always have to take that with a grain of salt, because they will swear up and down that this was Great Aunt Susie's dress that she wore during the Battle of Gettysburg at the Civil War or whatever, and then you flip it over and inside there's a tag that says it was made in 1921 or, you know, something like that. So, you know, what I've found, and I've been doing this for 5 years now, what I've found is that I can't think of anyone who's deliberately tried to deceive us. And the reason is there's nothing in it for them. You're making a donation to the museum. We're not paying you for it. So you tell me whatever you want, you know, you're not getting anything out of it. Maybe some recognition, I suppose. People usually aren't trying to deceive. They genuinely believe what it is that they're telling you. But then it's on us to check. And especially to check before we share that with others. So there's a certain level of research that's done on new acquisitions when they come in, but in a way that's almost internal for us, so we know what we have. You know, you can't go as far wrong if you're not sharing it with anybody else. You know, if somebody donates a chair and they tell me that it's made by the Berkey and Gay Furniture Company here in Grand Rapids and it's about 100 years old, and it looks right to me, you know, I might only check a couple of, we have furniture catalogs. I might check a couple of catalogs. If it all looks right, I'll put that in the record, we'll put it on the shelf. The more extensive research comes when you're going beyond that, when you're going to share it in an exhibit or a program or a loan. And that's when the time is to really sit down and do your research on individual objects and make sure that everything is what it says it is. One thing that you learn real quick in this business is how to read the object itself. A lot of times the object itself will have all or almost all the clues that you need to tell you what it is, especially a manufactured object. You know, things have serial numbers or patent dates, things like that right on them that, well, yes, they can be faked, and there are fakes in the antique world. A lot of times you can figure that all out, or you can combine it with other resources that we have available to us, like our reference library. A lot of what these books are behind us here are material culture identification type things. So if we want to try and identify coins from around the world, or, well, there's paper money and coins, you know, art, furniture, cameras, local history type stuff, we have these guides that sort of help us. Most of the people on staff here are more of what I would call generalists in terms of our historical background, at least that applies to me. You know, I don't have a real narrow focus. Material culture, American history is sort of my area. And a lot of the times I can make those general identifications. If we're going to go more specific, we'll usually bring in experts from the academic community. So we work closely with folks from Grand Valley, for example. A fun one, we did a beer exhibit this past fall, And one of the things that we put on exhibit was an ancient Babylonian clay tablet, about 4,000 years old, that was in our collection. We have a whole bunch of them, a whole drawer of them. And we brought in probably the one guy within a 100-mile radius. He's a scholar at Grand Valley who can read ancient Babylonian. So we brought him in to look at these tablets and find one for us that talked about beer that we could put in our exhibit. Because, you know, I could have picked one out of the drawer and put it on the wall and said something like, tablets like these often mention beer. What we were able to do was work with this guy, Professor Cataldo at Grand Valley, bring him in. We can say, this tablet is a list of taxes paid to the temple in Babylon in this year, which includes beer, because he was able to read it. So.
But it's something that you really, really want. Would you pay for it, or you just go to the board and ask for information and get it, try to buy it?
Yep.
Is it going to be useful for your exhibit?
That's absolutely right. We have, there are things more, and it's for things like that, they're things that usually would be right on exhibit. So there are things like our carousel that we're maybe well known for. I don't know. We have a fancy 1920s carousel that there was a special fundraising campaign to acquire that, and it was, you know, I don't even know what the number was, $1 million or something like that, to purchase, restore, and install that one artifact, that carousel that had to be raised. From time to time, there are things that we'll purchase. I don't think it's any secret. I think our acquisition budget that we have right now is sitting at around $6,000. So, you know, for all this 160-year-old museum with this huge collection, you know, right now, that's what I have in the bank to buy something. So it's not a lot. And usually it would go towards filling a specific gap in an exhibit or something like that. If we were doing a furniture exhibit and there was a specific piece that we needed, maybe then we would go out and purchase it.
Do you take them in private? Not mentions, but does anybody own things and hold them and then sell them to you?
We take in, yep, yeah, no, that's a good question. Oh, sure. The question is about, do we take in loans? And the answer is we take in loans if there's a purpose. From our point of view, we will augment our exhibits and our programs and the things that we do with items that we don't own, but what we don't want to be in the position is basically providing free storage for somebody. You know, if you, and it's almost always we seek out those loans. If my phone rings and somebody says, I've got something I want to loan you, the answer is almost always no. I went against this actually just last week. We have a Titanic exhibit that we just opened, and there was a guy that called up and said, I've got a cool painting by this famous artist. I guess he's famous, Ken Marshall. He paints the Titanic. I've got a Ken Marshall painting of the Titanic. Do you want me to loan it to you for 6 months while you have the exhibit and you can hang it in your lobby? I said, sure. It'd be kind of cool. It would add a little bit to the experience for our customers while they're waiting in line to get in the exhibit. They can look at this nice painting of the boat. What we don't want to be in the position of doing is providing free storage for people. Okay, you loaned us this, you know, whatever it is, your hot rod antique car or something like that. I've had somebody offered to loan us a car. Like, yeah, it would be cool, but we have in place almost all the time like a 3 to 5 year exhibit plan. And if antique cars aren't anywhere in the next 3 to 5 years, it doesn't do me any good to borrow your car and have it taking up room in my storage facility if nobody's getting anything out of it. So incoming loans, usually they're from other museums as opposed to individuals. So if we're doing a show on a particular topic and we're missing some pieces, we might call up the Henry Ford Museum, or, you know, even we've borrowed things from Smithsonian, American Museum, Natural History, different places, if there's things that we feel could make the show better.
Another good example, like from the beer exhibit,
Yeah.
the Hideout Brewery loaned us one of their original mash paddles. No, it was just a wooden canoe paddle. So you look at it, you know, it's monetarily, it's nothing that's all that expensive. But it was the fact that it was part of the brewery's history, and that's what we were looking for, was stuff that would tell a story about the brewery. That's actually the more valuable thing to us, is the story behind the object. And, you know, looking at our own collection here, you'll wander around, you'll see all kinds of crazy things. Well, why would you collect that? And it's not because it's a brick, it's because it's a brick from a certain building. It's that story that we're trying to tell.
things stand for other things a lot of the time, you know, in a museum collection. You can't collect the whole building, so you collect the brick.
Or in this case, like the,
What your next show is going to be.
Oh boy, that's at the leadership level of the museum, which is above Jared and I. They have they developed this plan based on different criteria that, you know, it needs to be something that supports our mission, which is to educate people, which is to talk about local history and Grand Rapids history, but also in the context of how it fits into the wider world. Things, you know, have to at least be self-sustaining, if not make money, you know. I mean, we're a not-for-profit institution, but we still have a lot of bills to pay. So when we consider which exhibits we're going to bring in, you know, they have to drive the gate to some extent. People have to want to be willing to come pay at least $8 to come see them. And then, you know, it has to be, and thankfully we're well equipped for this, you know, it has to be something that we can handle, that fits in one of our spaces, that, you know, that our insurance can cover. You know, there's all sorts of logistical issues. So like the Titanic exhibit that we have right now is one of, if not the most viewed traveling museum exhibits of all time. You know, it's been traveling around for 10 years or so. It's been to just about every, you know, major city. The artifacts in that exhibit are worth millions of dollars. You know, we have it in our biggest 8,000 square foot gallery, but all those factors came together, and despite, you know, the pretty hefty price tag to rent that exhibit and bring it here, we think it'll be something that if enough people come see it, it'll end up being a positive for the museum. Good questions. Thanks, guys. Anything else? Yeah.
I don't know, what's the oldest artifact you have stored here?
oldest artifact, probably be some fossils.
We make a distinction between an artifact is something made by humans and a specimen is something that's naturally occurring. So we have naturally occurring rocks and minerals that are probably as old as the earth, wherever you want to peg that. Human-made objects, we have things from ancient Egypt. We have
Babylon.
those Babylonian tablets that are 4,000 years old-ish. We have Stone Age tools. We'll show you some of those when we get upstairs. Jared's the archaeologist. How old are those? Some of those like axes
Probably
and things?
going back to 3,000-4,000 BC. So
So 6,000 years old,
Yep.
stone tools and things like that. Yeah. And then we also do contemporary collecting on the other end of the spectrum. We have an iPod in the collection. You know, I know because I donated it. The idea being that
That's gonna be old someday.
someday it'll be old, and it's a heck of a lot easier to get a hold of one now than 100 years from now trying to dig back through and find one. So looking forward, hopefully thinking that that was an important thing that was significant for this period in time, and hopefully the museum will be here 100 years from now. We'll want to interpret that, and then we'll have it. So I appreciate the fact that 100 years ago the curators had the foresight to collect stuff from Civil War veterans. So this museum predates the Civil War. When the Civil War ended in 1865, guys came back home, the museum was here. They said, hey, donate your rifle, donate your uniform to the museum. And they did, so we have this collection of Civil War stuff. Now, 150 years later, we decided to do a Civil War exhibit. That stuff was still here for us to draw from. So.
How are these items, how are they valued? Are they insured individually or?
We don't typically, so there's a couple answers. When you donate something to the museum, we're a charitable organization, so you're entitled to a tax deduction based on its value. But you have to independently determine that value. There's too much room for messing around if I tell you what it's worth. Because, you know, if you're my buddy, I can say, like, well, your chair's worth $1 million, and you get a tax write-off for $1 million. That's why the whole industry of independent appraisals exists. You can hire somebody to appraise your donation, and they give you a signed thing saying, this donation that you made to the public museum is worth this much. If that happens, we'll put that in the file so we have that information, but we didn't determine the value of it. For insurance purposes, and this is typical in the museum industry, we maintain what's called wall-to-wall fine arts insurance coverage, and I think we have a $10 million.
I have no idea.
I think it's 10. So the idea is if the entire museum burned to the ground, the check we would get would be $10 million. you know, who knows how accurate that might be, but I believe that's about what it is. The only time when we establish a value on something is when we have something that we own and we loan it to another institution. We have to know if they lose it or if their museum burns to the ground, how much do they owe us? And I do that kind of work based on just simple, mostly just internet research. You know, it depends, you know, with one-of-a-kind things, it can be hard sometimes to determine a value. It's kind of foreign to what I'm used to doing. We don't do it that much. But that's about the only time when we put a value on something that we have.
So are there any other businesses in Grand Rapids like that you guys store things at, like Kent Records or anything?
No, we do not. This facility, as you'll see when we start to walk around, is getting pretty full. Every time I bring something in, you know, Jared has to find a place to put it, and it can
Don't collect anything really big anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So there may be something like that in our future. Right now, it's probably more information than you guys care to know, but technically the building that we're standing in right now is owned by the city of Grand Rapids. The museum used to be a department of the city, so when that was the case, it made sense that they just provided a building for us to store the collection in. About 5-6 years ago, the city of Grand Rapids cut the museum's appropriation to zero, so we no longer received any tax support from the city. And the museum's response to that was to split apart from the city and become an independent 501c3 nonprofit, which we still are right now. But we didn't have any of our own buildings. So basically we rent the museum from the city, we rent this storage building from the city. So no, it's not like Kent Records, but we do pay the city per square foot of storage in here to keep our collections. So it's not something that probably a lot of people don't realize.
So back to the insurance and everything, like what happens if, say there's like water damage or there's a fire, so like what do you guys do with your records and your stuff? Do you have to go through and see what's still there and what's not there? Or do you have to go like appraise if it's worth anything or get rid of stuff? Or?
Thankfully, we've never had to. A good example, though, would be the Holland Museum. 2 years ago, did they have their flood? Two or 3 years ago?
Sounds terrible.
There was a huge flood at the Holland Museum, and they had 3 feet of standing water in their storage room.
Yeah.
And the worst thing about it for them was not only were museum artifacts that were stored on the bottom 2 shelves got a soaking, all the first 2 drawers of all their file cabinets with the records about those artifacts got ruined. So it made it much more difficult for them to do what you're describing, which is figure out what you're supposed to have had, what it was, if it's worth saving, all that kind of stuff. For us, thankfully, we haven't had a disaster like that. But yeah, if we were to, and if it's something that was covered by our insurance, then yeah, I would imagine it would be on us to come up with the inventory of what was damaged and how much damage was caused and how much, either the replacement value would be, or for things that are irreplaceable, if there's extensive conservation work that needed to be done, how much that was going to cost, and you submit a claim. Same way you would for, your car if you get in a car accident or something like that.
That would probably take quite a while, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think 3 years later, the Holland Museum is still dealing with theirs.
So if you let something out, or you get another museum, what's procedures that you go through? It's a big procedure for that or something?
When
Sign up?
like with loans, you mean?
Yeah. You loan somebody or you receive all that.
We have active files of all of our loans that are out right now. So there's a file cabinet in there where you can open the drawer and see every institution that we have a loan with right now who has something of ours. And every institution that we have a loan with, we have a signed document called a loan agreement. It's a legal contract signed by the museum and signed by whoever the other museum that something is lent to. And there's conditions to that contract. It includes the insurance value, and if you lose our stuff, this is how much you owe us. But it's more That's sort of the extreme. The idea of the conditions of the contract is more towards, we will loan you this if you promise to keep it in a secure location, you know, with consistent temperature, with consistent humidity, so that nothing bad happens to it, is more of the way that those contracts are set up. But yeah, we wouldn't loan something, we really don't loan things to individuals. We would only make a loan to another institution or organization that, you know, they have to present us with a certificate of their insurance to prove that they can insure the value of whatever it is. And they have to, we go and check on our loans. So even if we loan something, we have some loans out to just to Kendall College, their new building, they've got some stuff. But every year, somebody has to go over and physically look at the stuff that's on loan, make sure it's still in good condition, you know, do a check on it, make sure it's all still there. So we keep tabs on all that stuff. Yes, ma'am.
So, if you were to need to find something, some artifact or, that had been given to you probably quite a while ago, but you weren't really familiar with it, so is everything then filed alphabetically then, or is it filed like, by
Artifact 152
artifact
or
type,
600,000
maybe
would be
artifact
filed,
type?
or-
How would you find that?
Lots of different ways. In the museum field, and this is how we do it, the main way that things are kept track of is through something called an accession number, okay? And if you're familiar with databases at all, and I'm not, so I sort of, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. I think in the database world, there's something called a key field in your database, which is a number that's unique only to that one item in a database, right? So the idea is our accession number is the key field, if you will, for our whole system of keeping track of our things. So when an object comes in, it gets that unique number, and that's how the files are organized. So these, and this actually has been, the numbering systems have changed over the years, but all of the systems have a numbering, have a numbering aspect to them, and it's in numerical order. So these books, it's just accession number 166627 is a postcard, 16628 is a postcard, 16629 is a postcard.
But if you had something, let's say that postcard, you didn't know the number of it, then,
That's Jared's world. The object itself gets the number physically written on it.
so you probably have
There's-
sections at this.
Like I said, when we first get the artifact in, it has to receive a number, and the number is physically written on it in some way that is reversible. Whether it's just attaching a tag to it, or there's a couple different methods of doing it. The number is written right on it, and then within the database, we'll put the storage location. So it's going to be in room 145, unit number 250, box number 3. So we can look up, and within the database, we can look it up by, you know, what it is, postcard, bicycle, you know.
Right, then you refer back to the number to
Yep.
Tell you what, you guys have such great questions, and these are the best questions I've ever had. I'm going to tell every group that comes from now on that everybody has to have a question. Let's go to another room, because let's go to our processing room. We can show you where they actually put these numbers on the things and show you actually how they look. And I can't stand still for this long, so let's walk. And let Brett be in the front here. So follow us, please. Yeah. They have far and away the best questions.
They do.
Let's go on processing.
Are you guys going to be in there for a while or what?
Yeah, a few minutes at least. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Anna's going to work there in a bit, but
Okay,
I'm going to leave now.
thanks. Come on in. Can you maybe bring that cart around from behind the door there with the new donations? Are those numbered yet, Jed?
Yes. The stuff on that card is numbered then too.
Good.
I'm going to grab one of the numbering kits.
Oh, thanks.
Pardon me?
All right, we got everybody? So I mean it. You guys have great questions. This is actually really, really good. I think sometimes it's nice to just see what it is that we're talking about. So this is what we call our processing room. It's kind of the central workspace where artifacts come to, either if it's a new donation coming in or if it's something from storage that's maybe going out on exhibit or going on loan. It comes here to be processed. So there's lots of different steps in that. But the one that we were just talking about with your question was the numbering. So this cart right here is recent donations to the museum. So we usually do them in batches. Our board has to approve all donations. The board meets 4 times a year, so we usually have 4 batches of acquisitions a year. So in 2012, I think we added about 500 new things to the collection. This is maybe 100 things or so on this cart. And new donations, they come in here to be processed, and one really important part of that is to write the accession number physically on the object. So Jared mentioned that it has to be reversible. The idea being if we ever need to get that number off of there, if we ever want to remove the item from the collection, or more often what happens is our exhibits department doesn't like the look of it when they want to display something. They're like, oh, can you write it on the other side? But the number is written on there in a way that's reversible, but you also don't want it to easily come off because that's the way you can identify it. And I know this sounds crazy, but this will really happen where somebody will be in storage doing some work and will take off their sweater or will set down their clipboard, and a couple days later somebody will come through and find that, and I honestly do not know if this sweater that I just picked up is part of the museum's collection or if it's just Jared's sweater that he left up there. The only way you know is the physical accession number written on the object is the way to know if something is part of the permanent collection. And that's your key field that tells you that's the number that you look up in all of those other places, in the card file, in the ledger books, in the computer, to find the information about the object.
Alex, let me ask that question a slightly different way. Let's say that mall you were talking about that Abraham Lincoln definitely was known to use, you wanted to find it, and you didn't have memory of it. How would you hunt for it? Is that something you have to go through ledger books and then through the index cards and then the database?
The location information about where something is physically located is the one thing that we have moved completely to the computer. So in this case, if you know the object or its accession number, so if you either can type in whatever the number is, 166 something something, or if you can type in Lincoln's Mall into the computer, it'll bring up that record and it will tell you that at this particular moment it is at the Van Andel Museum Center on the 3rd or 2nd floor in the Civil War exhibit. Are you talking about the ticking? It's the motion detector. I know. Security, right? Excuse me. So that information, as up to date as we can keep it, the physical location of where an object is in the computer. That said, that information is sometimes many, many years old. And so you might look up something and it'll say, it's in the Star Building, G Room 72. Well, the Star Building was torn down 12 years ago. It was an old storage building that the museum used to have, and you have to go through a pretty extensive process of going through the old records to say, wow, everything from the Star Building that was in this room came to the new building to this room, and now it's here, and then you go in and update the computer with its new location. But location information is probably the most important field in our database, and so is the one that we've prioritized getting onto the computer.
So I've got an example here of a book that is, when you're looking at it, you'll see the current location, and that you'll see the code up on top, and then it breaks it down. But within the code, you can see that this is in room 145, General Archives, box B1, or I'm sorry, B8, section 11. So I mean, it's all right in the database. It makes it really easy for us to figure out where stuff is. The only thing that can really go wrong is if you accidentally put it in the wrong box, and then good luck finding it. So we always have to be very, very accurate with our records keeping.
The problem that we have is that we physically moving an object from one shelf to another or one box to another can take you about 2 seconds. Making sure you write it down and then go sit down at your computer and update it can take 5 minutes, let's say, for an object. And if you're moving hundreds of objects at a time, what happens is the objects all get moved, and then somebody somewhere has a pile of paper on their desk of all the things that need to get updated in the computer. So we are sometimes behind with that work because there's just not enough of us to do it.
I know we have another question, but I'm also just wondering, have you considered barcoding?
We have talked.
Feasible.
We have talked about barcoding. There are some museums that have done barcoding. One of the issues with it is in our field, it's not only best practice, but it's like almost holy that the number, the code be physically put on the object. And where some museums have tried it and failed is how to put the barcode on the object. If the object is, it could say an ancient coin or something, but the equivalent of a dime, how do you put a barcode on a dime? And how do you do it in a way that's reversible so you're not if it's a 2,000-year-old Greek coin, not a dime, how do you put it on a way that you're not damaging that item, but that you can still scan it? Barcodes, near-field communication, QR codes, lots of things like that have a lot of potential, but because of the nature of the things that need to be coded, you run into some roadblocks. I would like to see us do some barcoding or some type of coding like that, at least at the level of our either like boxes or shelves as opposed to individual objects. So if you had, let's say this was a shelf in storage, the shelf had a barcode and you could boop and it would tell you at least what was supposed to be on it, and that way you can much faster reconcile your inventory than doing one object at a time. But no, we haven't done anything like that. There are museums that have done it, so it's possible.
I was just going to ask, when indexing, how do you determine the number?
The number that gets assigned to an object, so I was talking about this a little bit before, it's been different at different periods in time. So when the museum first started, the method that they used was to assign blocks of numbers for specific types of objects. So number 1 through 10,000 was for books. Number 10,001 through 20,000 was for mammals. The 30,000s were for birds, whatever. And they were assigned consecutively as they came in, but they wouldn't all be used. So if 1 through 10,000 was for books and you had 4,682 books in the collection, each of those would get a number, and then you just have unused block of numbers. Or even worse, if you filled them all up, you needed another, if you had your 10,001 book, you couldn't use it. So that was the way the museum did it at first. That was probably in the 1800s, sort of the way of doing things. Another way of doing things was simply consecutive numbers. When something comes in, and they actually started, when they changed over to doing consecutive numbers, maybe 1900, they started with the last number of the blocks that they had assigned. I think it was 100,000. So the first object that came in was 100,001. Next object was 100,002, whatever it was. If it was an ice skate and then a Tickle Me Elmo, the numbers, it was just got the next number. The way that we do it now, and this is another best practice in the museum field, we use what's called a 3-part number, and you guys can't see it, but on the ice skate here, the first part of the number is the year that it was donated to the museum. So this ice skate is 2013. Then there's a decimal point. The next number is a 3, which means it was part of the 3rd donation of the year. And going back to our records in the other room, it will tell us that the 3rd donation of the year came from the Grand Rapids Public Library. And then it's 2013.3.4. It was the 4th item in that donation. So those are the 3 parts to the number. The year, the accession, we call it, it's the 3rd accession of the year, and it's the 4th item in that accession, is the way that they get assigned now. And it works pretty well, I would say. If you're familiar with it, it tells you a lot just by looking, and if you're not familiar, it gives you a lot of clues that you need to start putting together the picture of what it is. You guys want to walk around some more? Okay. We're going to hop on the elevator to your left there. So this is one of our storage rooms. This is about 20,000 square feet, and this is a good storage room to just walk through and get an idea of the types of things that we have in the museum's collection. And the reason being, we try and store like things together whenever we can. That's a part of how Jared makes my life easier. When I'm doing an exhibit about furniture or weapons or whatever, if he's stored all of the furniture together, it's a lot easier for me to walk up and down and look for things. This particular room, one way that you can categorize the stuff here is it's stuff that's too big to fit in boxes. So we have another storage room that's probably about the same size as this. We'll probably take you through it if we have time, where everything's in boxes. So you walk up and down the aisles and you're looking at boxes. It's not that exciting. So we take people to this room first because it's more to look at. But what you can see as you start to, and we'll sort of do a lap around this room so you can see some of this stuff, but also look at how it's organized and how the units and stuff are set up. So for a location that Jared's talking about, every unit has a number.
Yep, we're standing in room 201. This is unit number 280, and then you break it down into shelves. So you got shelf 1, shelf 2, and that'll all show up right in that database. So if I'm looking for chair number 192738, and I look it up in the database, it'll say what room it's in, unit number 280, shelf 1. And it at least breaks it down to this section, so that we're only looking at, you know, a dozen or so artifacts rather than wandering around this room going, well, I have no clue where it's at.
Now, where that can break down is sometimes we use something called page boxes, which is about the size of 2 banker's boxes, if you can picture a big box. And if the box is full of coins, and there's 500 coins in a box, well, your computer told you it's in coin box 3. So you pull out coin box 3, and you're like, oh, crap. You know, you got 2 hours of it because it's invariably going to be the one on the very bottom in the back corner is the one that you were looking for. So it's not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination, but the more accurate we can make it and the more we can break things down by unit, shelf, drawer. We have things on screens on the sides of the walls that you'll see around here. It makes everything more efficient in terms of how we can find
It's
things.
a lot easier to find something in, you know, a 6 by 10 area rather than wandering around a building that's, you know, thousands of square feet. So.
Any questions before we walk a little bit? Yes, sir.
With the numbers and just finding the exact location and everything, how do you go about finding that within the 4 different ways that you have of filing your stuff?
The accession number, so we made a choice to do this. The accession numbers never changed. So if something came in the 1800s and it got one of the old style accession numbers, it still has that number. We did not, and this is, people have tried this different ways, and I don't know if one's necessarily better than the other, but the choice was made that we're not going to try and retroactively apply our new system to the old stuff. So we don't have anything that's numbered 1864.2 point whatever. It has whatever number it got when it first came in. That's the way it's listed in the ledger handwritten book. That's the way it's listed in the computer. Okay? So whatever number it got, it kept that. And like I said before, the location information in terms of finding it is all, that's the one thing that's all in the computer. So that's the place where you go to look for where it's physically located. Because those other, the ledger books, the card files, the manila folder files, those all have information about the object itself. It'll say, you know, it's a table, it's made of mahogany, it was made by this company, blah, blah, blah. It's all information that's intrinsic to the object. Those sources don't tell us where it's stored.
Gotcha.
Okay? Let's sort of do a walk around the room. We'll stop at a few places and give you a chance to ask questions or ask about specific objects that might catch your eye.
Yes. Yep.
Yes, class, this is where you take pictures.
If you got questions about any of the artifacts, go ahead and ask.
Can I use this for my dining room table?
That's a no. This is a harpsichord, post-Renaissance.
Really? How
Yep.
old is that?
I'm not sure. We're talking probably 1600s.
That's
It's like a, yep, it's like a piano, but instead of a hammer striking the strings, there's a pick that picks at the strings.
Oh, look at, we're just going to talk about.
When I was young, we had one of those. Is that
It depends on the object itself. If there's certain, like types of paint on an object,
Can you guys come down a little bit just so more people can gather around here?
Fade.
Keep coming this way a little bit. Come on.
Just really kind
Keep
of
going.
each individual artifact has its own special needs.
Bunch of names on it and stuff.
Uh-huh.
Like a big wood one has a bunch of individual drawers. Is that for like mail?
A little bit.
Uh,
I've got some
pharmacy. It's
antique
from a
bottles
pharmacy.
and
Those
whatnot
are
that from a,
ingredients that the pharmacist would use.
family
to-
site that I
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So this
I've-
this
I'm
particular artifact is
mainly
one that I
historian,
just
so
sometimes like to
the
stop at,
archaeological things that I've been on,
talk about a
all
little
the
bit,
artifacts
and
on
the
institution
the
that's
theme
not-
or whatever that we usually
we
bring
would
up
never
here is
keep
the idea that you
artifacts
can
per person.
read an artifact a lot of the same way that you can read any sort of primary source
This is a
from
giant
history.
basket. Somebody bought
So
one of
this
these and
particular
brought it back
washing
here
machine
and
is
put
what
in
it
the
is.
department store.
I find really interesting. It's it's
That's
about
the story
100 years
behind the
old, give or
artifact, that's
take,
the important thing.
and you can tell a
Maybe they
lot
used it for a
about
boat,
the
I don't
time
know.
period that it came from, the people who made it, the people who might have used it, just by looking at it. So those are the kinds of things that are interesting to me and sort of emphasize how we do what we do, which is use objects to tell stories. So this particular washing machine, you look at it, and you can tell that it's a mass-produced or industrial type of artifact. It was probably made in a factory. But on the other hand, it's not, when you look at it, you can tell that it's old. It doesn't have the real kind of professional, maybe that we would call it, things that sort of a manufactured good that we're used to today. And so with a little bit more detailed look into those types of things, you could maybe tell how old it was. You could look at the way that the screws that attach it together are done, or the way the wood was sawn. What I like to look at more specifically is things that help you identify the object right on it. Well, a manufactured item, usually the manufacturer puts their name right on it. So this was made by the 1900 Washer Company. So 1900 is actually not a date, it's the name of the company. The 1900 Washer Company in New York, New York. So if somebody donates this to me and this is written out right on here, I have no reason to believe that this is a fake, and I can use that as a basis to start my research. The other thing that I think about is really interesting is the slogan of this particular company that they printed on the washing machine is Save Women's Lives. So the idea here is about 100 years ago, if you were a woman in maybe a middle-class family, you weren't wealthy enough to have a maid to do your laundry for you, you did your own laundry, and you probably did the laundry for your whole family, you might spend 20, 30, 40 hours a week washing clothes. Probably not a whole lot of fun. And maybe if if you were able to save up enough and buy one of these washing machines, and it cut your laundry time to maybe only 10 hours a week, maybe you would consider that had saved your life, or at least made your life considerably better. So you can kind of tell a lot about, like I said, the time period, the people who used it, or the advertising, who it was directed at, just by looking at what's on the object itself. So I think that's a fun one. Jared, do you want to do the Templer-Holtz next? All right, follow Jared. He's going to show you another cool object.
We're right around the corner here.
So what's that big sombrero down there?
It's a basket, and we don't.
Like from African women who have
It's a
have on their heads?
Chinese grain storage basket is our best bet. It's actually unidentified, really. We don't actually know too much about it. Yeah, gather around, you guys. We're going to look at this piece right here.
Yeah,
So
this thing right here. So let's have everybody get around where you can see it. And we're going to test your skills as forensic historians. Looking at this thing, do you have any guesses as to what this machine is for, or what this thing is? I'll let you know it's a Templer-Holtz machine. Not that that helps at all, but anybody have any guesses? What it does or what it was used for? Well, take a look at it and just kind of analyze the components.
maybe sewing or some kind of material, because it holds this thing?
Well, you have a crank here.
Like it's something.
Is it to make like
All right. Here, let's see if actually working here might help out. The plates in there spin together, creating static electricity. Same idea as if you're wearing, those plastic bottom slippers and you scuff your feet across the floor and then zap your brother or sister. Static electricity, that's all that is. This is actually a medical device. A lot of times referred to it as a quack medical device because what they use it for didn't actually really work all that well. Let's say back at that day you're going bald and they wanted to try and cure that. Well, what we're going to do here is attach this little attachment. All right. Now, your subject would stand under here, and then the doctor person would sit here after attaching the chain up to that, and then crank this thing, and all that electricity you see shooting there will go right into your scalp, supposedly curing your baldness. Another use, so, you're outside working out or whatever, your arms are real sore from doing whatever you were doing. Well, you go in, you have this little attachment here. You can take that chain and attach it there, and then he'll run it up and down your arm and shock the snot out of your arm to cure the soreness in your muscles. So now, just kind of give you an idea. You've got your regular, it's a 120 volt bulb. So that builds up a pretty good charge, right? Now you have these objects here, these are called Leyden jars, where you can hook the chains up to, and those act as a amplifier for the charge. It makes the charge a heck of a lot stronger. So which college was it that?
Hope College.
Hope College. They had it in their physics department, and what the professors would do would take textbooks and stick them between there with the Leyden jars hooked up, and it would shoot electricity through the textbook.
They punch holes in
Yeah.
inch-thick physics books.
Yep. It probably tingled a little bit, yeah.
It tingles when you hold that light bulb.
But electricity, as far in this state, was a relatively unknown science back then. So they figured, hey, maybe this would help, by doing these things. So somebody figured this is a good way to make money by, creating static electricity and shocking people. Not only did it make you money, but it was probably fun for them too. You never know. But so
Cool. So that's one object that we really like because it not only is it a interesting antique, but it still works. So it's good for demonstrations. So, any other questions before we walk some more? All right. How about let's just take sort of a lap around this room, and what we'll do is, how are we doing on time, actually? Are we?
2:45 right now.
Okay, when do you want us to be done?
Well, we need to be done with GRCC by 4, but,
Oh, I think we'll be fine.
yeah.
Okay, tell you what, let's take like maybe 10 minutes or so to walk around the edge of the room, but Jared and I will kind of float, and if you guys want to walk up and down the aisles and look at some things and ask some more specific questions, we can do that, and then in about 5 or 10 minutes, I'll start flashing the lights, and that'll mean meet back at the door, and we'll go to the next place, okay? Just give you a little bit of free time to look at some of this stuff and ask questions. The Garbage Pail Kids stickers or the panels? At first I thought it was a door, but it's I think it's dorm furniture. So yeah, the bed. So like the kid who was on the bottom bunk was sticking his stickers on the top bunk. The idea behind these though is that, and there's what I would call traditional records management that the museum does when we have like a box of old tax records that has to be kept for a few years. That's what we keep above the loading dock right here in those Office
That's
Depot
an iron
boxes
lung.
behind the fence there.
Yep, so that would
So
help
like
someone
the
breathe.
accounting department
They
will
put
send
the
over
patient
10
in there,
boxes
its head
of,
would
their
stick out this
audit,
side here,
whatever,
and
their
this
tax
diaphragm would
audit
move up
from
and down and create
2012.
positive and negative
and it kind
pressure,
of
which would
floats up
force
there
air
until
into
it's
their
7
lungs.
years is up, and then
It's
somebody
quite
comes
often
and
used
shreds it and it
for
goes away.
polio
So
patients who couldn't
compared to
breathe
this
on
stuff,
their own,
it
or
doesn't
they're
get a
having
lot
trouble
of
breathing.
love, but we do
So
still have
that positive and negative
any
pressure
business
on,
should
on
have,
the outside of the
cover their
body would
liabilities
create a
and make sure
vacuum
that all that stuff is
or
taken care of.
compression
We do still
in the
do
person's
that sort of more
lungs,
traditional records management
making
type
it easier
stuff.
for them to
It
breathe.
doesn't really affect my day-to-day life too much, so I don't have too much more to say about it, but there it is.
Yep,
We have a question come up about the database.
Okay.
yep, that's because now we have the respirators where the tube goes down their throat.
You
Yeah.
guys created it yourself? What's its history?
The database we use the database itself is called M3. It's proprietary software produced by a company called Menisys Incorporated. They're out of Vancouver, Canada, and they make software for museums, archives, and libraries. So the database that we use is sort of an evolution of we've had it for 20 years or so, and it's sort of kept up with the times. In terms of it being, we within the last 3 or 4 years upgraded from the old client server model to one that's cloud-based is the new fancy way of talking about it. So it's online. You can sit down at any computer in the world with internet access to it and log into it. As staff, we have a special login that allows us read and write access, so we can make changes to the database. The general public, which would include all of you, can access it through the museum's website through a read-only format where you can view most of the information in that database. The database, we say we have 250,000 artifacts and specimens in the collection. That's our best guess. I can tell you for sure that the database has 165,000 records in it. The way that things get counted accounts for some of the discrepancy. Sometimes you will have a database record that says 100 buttons or something, and then somebody counted all the buttons as one. So that's sort of how you get the discrepancy in numbers. Usually when there's not enough time to catalog each button and give its own record, somebody will do things as a group. But that database is accessible to the general public with the exception of things that we specifically restrict. So for given records, we restrict the personal information of our donors. We encourage them to put a credit line which will acknowledge them as the donor of a particular object, but it'll usually say gift of Alex Forrest or whatever. It doesn't say, my address and home phone number or anything like that. We keep that information, but that's not available to the general public. Likewise, for security reasons, we don't publish online the location of where the object is in storage. Most likely it wouldn't mean anything to anybody, but if somebody is planning an Italian job on our storage room, we don't give them all that information. And then we can restrict specific objects. There are some things that, because this museum has been around for so long, that we have in our collections that are covered by like certain federal laws even that are not really appropriate to share with the public. So for example, we have things in our collections that are related to Native American communities that are covered by a federal law called the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act of 1980 or something like that. And what that basically means is any institution that gets federal money or ever got federal money, which includes us, is basically not allowed to have stuff that was dug up from Native American graves. And so we are in the midst of a long process to comply with the law, identify those items that are in our collection, and return them to the tribes that they came from. In the meantime, those items are restricted, so they're not available online. Likewise, there's things that came out of World War II. I'm not sure if we have any in our collection, Nazi-era provenance laws where things that were looted by the Nazis from occupied Europe, a lot of them ended up in museums, more so in Europe than in Germany, more so than here. But occasionally, American museums will come across things like that. There's things that we have, I don't know if they're restricted from being online, but that are covered by natural history specimens, like migratory birds and marine mammals that are protected by different treaties. we're allowed to have them in the museum, but in some cases it's not appropriate to share them in an online format like that, so we can restrict things. So, any other questions? Want to go see another room? Okay, let's go this way.
It's the ghosts in the collection.
Oh, the ghosts. They're the Native American ghosts coming to get their stuff back. I got it. Okay. That's why you can't show it online.
Jared, do you want to maybe show them one of the archaeology drawers?
Yep.
So if you can let Jared get back in there by those white cabinets, thanks. So like I was just saying, that Native American law, it means that a lot of our collections that were related to Native American archaeology have been segregated, and they're in that special secure vault that I was telling you about. The stuff that remains is what's here, and what Jared will show you guys. It tends to be more stuff that's not sacred or ceremonial, things that are more like tools. So like Stone Age Native American tools and things like that. We still are allowed to have and exhibit and share those types of collections.
That's not the one I'm looking for. We'll just use this one. So I'm not sure what, do you know the location of the digs, where these came from?
It's on the drawer. At least there's one drawer I think that says Michigan, so at least they know
it's all from local archaeology.
I don't know specific anymore.
Yeah, probably like the Sand Creek digs. But a lot of it is all just Native American tools. Like you're saying, it's not something that was religious or ceremonial in any way, shape, or form. This is just everyday items that the archaeologists found within the matrix when they were digging. So in some cases, it looks just like a rock, but an archaeologist will look at it, and by seeing certain grooves or certain patterns within the stonework, they decide, well, this is definitely a tool. This is something that they used in their everyday life. So, and we keep all that stuff in these white cases here. Example like axe heads or pick heads. You see, you think that's a regular formation for a rock? No, they ground it down and added a point to it so that way they could use it. So I don't think we have a whole lot of calls for research on this stuff.
Not too much. It's the archaeological expertise tends to be more with the universities. So University of Michigan and places like that. We have enough to get by and to do some cool exhibits and interpretation, but it's not any particular strong suit of ours. One area that is pretty strong is our historic clothing collection, which I saw some of you guys eyeballing there behind you. So we have historic clothing probably from about the 1820s up through the present. Anything older than that, you're getting into things that it just doesn't, the material just doesn't really hold up. It's any textile that's much more than 200-300 years old is, pretty impressive. And what we tend to have here is things that were donated by the people of Grand Rapids, and what people tend to donate is sort of their fanciest dress, their wedding dress. That whole first row is wedding dresses there. It's really interesting because they're in chronological order, or close, rough chronological order. You can sort of walk down and see how they changed over time, wedding dress styles. But lots of evening wear. Women tend to donate their fanciest dresses. Men tend to donate their service uniforms. So we have lots of military uniforms and the sort of accompanying things that go with them, patches and belts and helmets and things of that nature. So that's actually a really strong collection. It's something that we are just recently getting back into a position where we can start to use it again. The museum for the past 12 years or so has been dealing with a moth infestation in the clothing collection. So this is more Jared's world than mine, but the problem arose when the museum borrowed an object from another museum that was infested with moths, and it contaminated our clothing collection. At that time, the clothing was stored in a completely different storage room. Everything that you see in here has actually gone through a freezing process. Down in our basement, we have a freezer that goes down to -30 degrees that kills, they stay in there for several weeks, and it can kill any potential buggies that are in the clothing. So this is our clean room where all the clothing that's been demothed has now gone through that cycle in the freezer, and it's come back up here. And now we're just getting, like, there was a 10-year period basically where we couldn't exhibit any of our clothing because we were afraid that there'd be one moth egg in something. If we put it over in the other building, we'd bring the moths over to the museum. So everything was segregated and quarantined. And now this room has been set up for a year or more now. Knock on wood, no moth activity. And we're now getting to the point where we can actually start to utilize this collection again. So the other things that are in here are, and we'll open up a couple doors and show you down here, what we call our ethnographic collections. So stuff from all over the world. And then our weapon collections are down in the end. There's swords and guns and knives and things like that.
When you're looking at the clothes too, it's really nice in this room because, like Alex said, everything is in chronological order. When you're out in the field and you're doing history research on certain things, you don't always have all that stuff right together. So you can use what's called a stylistic serration. I don't know if you guys have studied anything like that, where you look at objects that are similar and you can kind of place it within the timeline. So when you're looking up and down these aisles, kind of look at the little changes that you see from bay to bay, that you can see how the styles changed and how they developed. And then think about, if you're out in the field and you see a garment or whatever, how you'd be able to kind of compare the attributes of that to stuff from a similar age to kind of figure out where it would fit within the timeline.
And we'll just take maybe about 5 minutes to let you walk around this room, and then we'll head back down to where we started and sort of wrap up if you have any last questions. So I'll give you 5 minutes. I'll open a few of the cabinets down here for people to look at. That's the hard part, is we can't try any of them on. Oh, these are nurses. So you got suits, there's fire department, police department, who wrap all around it. That's supposed to keep it all from falling. So what's that? That's the mummy. Its head is broken off. Like,
This is the cake.
yeah, when it's on display, and then the actual mummy. The idea is what we, to try and be responsible and ethical, what we have tried to do is identify. Thank you. Do you guys have any other questions that we can answer for you before we wrap up? I know it's a lot to kind of see in a couple hours there, but
Just kind of keep in mind everything that's in this building. When we're talking about history, using sources, primary sources, secondary sources. These artifacts are our primary sources, whether it's a letter written to somebody in the Civil War or any of the artifacts that you've seen. You can gain historical information because these objects come from that era. So it's very valuable when you're doing history research.
We thank you very much for having us. This has been fun, fantastic.
you're welcome. Very good questions. We really appreciate that. It makes it